I remember exactly how the argument began. It was at the dining room table of my childhood home, the same place where I used to sit and chat about my day in grade school. My mother had just discovered that the man I was seeing, my eventual husband, came from a background they considered beneath me. They had always insisted that I would marry someone with a lofty job title or a privileged upbringing. Brian, in their view, was a nobody. The fact that he was an artist made them sneer, as if creativity were synonymous with irresponsibility. My father, who had spent years bragging about my potential future as a lawyer's wife or a doctor's companion, seethed with resentment. My mother, who had once boasted that I'd bring home a man who would shine at the country club, turned cold and distant. She sneered at Brian's paint-stained jeans and the perpetual smudge of charcoal on his fingers, as though it symbolized everything they despised. I tried to make them understand that Brian's passion was not a sign of instability, but rather a testament to his devotion and perseverance. However, they refused to listen. My father said that if I insisted on going through with the wedding, I was no longer his daughter. My mother, who once seemed to love me unconditionally, uttered words laced with venom, accusing me of throwing away my future for a childish infatuation. I stormed out that night, tears spilling down my cheeks, but still unwilling to believe they would truly disown me. I had misjudged them. Within days, they stopped answering my calls, blocked me on social media, and told our relatives not to mention my name. Only when I stepped into that wedding chapel did I fully grasp the extent of their betrayal. Everything changed. They made good on their threat without a hint of regret. When the invitations for my wedding went out, my parents ignored them entirely. They refused to sponsor the ceremony as promised, forcing me and Brian to scramble for a smaller venue. On the day we took our vows, the 2 seats reserved for them in the front row remained heartbreakingly empty. I fought back tears each time I glanced at those seats, but I was determined not to let their absence overshadow the joy of declaring my love. Brian squeezed my hand, silently offering reassurance that we would face whatever challenges awaited us together. After the reception, I packed my remaining belongings from their house, slipping in while they were away so I wouldn't have to endure more painful confrontations. It felt surreal to box up my entire childhood, carefully tucking away keepsakes and photographs that now seemed tainted. My mother's voice echoed in my head, "You made your choice." Part of me still clung to the hope they would show up at the last minute, apology in hand, but the days turned into weeks and months without a single word from them. Instead, I focused on building a life with Brian in our cramped apartment, taking on extra shifts at a local cafe to help pay the bills. Financial struggles replaced the warm glow of newlywed bliss, but at least we were united. Late at night, we'd lie in bed talking about our dreams, his art career, my desire to eventually finish college, and the hope of starting a family. Even though my parents had disowned me, I felt a sense of independence that was both terrifying and thrilling. There would be no turning back. They had drawn the line, and I refused to cower behind it. I felt free. We settled into a routine, determined to shape our own destiny. Our apartment building was old, every floorboard creaking with a voice of its own, but we cherished its quirks. Brian worked tirelessly, painting murals for local businesses and selling sketches online whenever he could. While the income was unpredictable, I admired his dedication. He poured his heart into every brushstroke, convinced that art was more than a job, it was part of his soul. I continued my shifts at the cafe, eventually working my way up to assistant manager, a position that came with slightly better pay and a taste of authority. Each promotion and commission felt like proof that our love could bloom without my parents' approval or financial support. Sometimes, though, I'd lie awake at night, haunted by the echo of my father's last words, "You are no daughter of mine." No matter how busy I kept myself, that betrayal lingered in the shadows of my mind. The hurt was like a dull ache in my chest, flaring up whenever a customer asked if my parents were proud of me. I learned to smile politely and deflect questions about family. Brian's parents were kind enough, but they lived in another state, so their involvement in our day-to-day life was minimal. We relied mostly on each other and the small circle of friends who cheered us on despite our limited resources. Over time, the sting of disownment morphed into hardened resolve. My parents' silence was better than their disapproval. Yet sometimes, I'd watch a mother and daughter laughing in the cafe and feel a pang of longing. I buried that longing, reminding myself how my own mother had glared at me when she told me to leave. She'd chosen pride over me. I refused to ever forget. 3 years slipped by. Our financial situation improved just enough for us to move into a slightly bigger place. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a modest kitchen that Brian once painted sunshine yellow. This second bedroom became his studio, where canvases leaned against every available surface, waiting for color. Around that time, we began talking about having a child. At first, it was just a whispered idea late at night, something to hope for when we felt more secure. But the more we discussed it, the more real it became. I couldn't help imagining a little girl with Brian's calm eyes, or a rambunctious boy who liked to doodle on the walls. We made lists, calculating expenses and planning for daycare. We laughed over the idea of childproofing a place already bursting with paint cans. Eventually, the idea turned into a decision. We would try. I remember the day I found out I was pregnant. Brian was out delivering a commissioned portrait, and I stood in the bathroom staring at 2 pink lines, a wave of excitement and fear crashing over me. This was what we'd wanted, but a tiny voice in my head still whispered about my parents, about how they had not been there for my wedding, how they would not be there for this child. I brushed that voice aside. We had built a life without them. We would raise a family without them too. When Brian got home, I broke the news, and the delight in his eyes chased away any lingering doubts. We stood in our cramped living room, holding each other, and I felt a certainty I had never experienced before. Our love had carried us this far. This baby would be a testament to that triumph. Word traveled fast. A friend posted a casual photo of me cradling my barely visible baby bump on social media, and within days, I received a barrage of messages. Former classmates offered congratulations, old neighbors commented well wishes, and acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. Then came the phone call I never expected to answer, an unknown number that turned out to be my mother's. I almost dropped the phone when I heard her voice. She sounded different, strained, as though uncertainty weighed on every syllable. "Your father and I heard," she said awkwardly. "We wanted to say congratulations." An entire lifetime of betrayal flared in my mind. The memory of those empty chairs at my wedding, the times I tried calling and was sent straight to voicemail. I felt Brian's watchful gaze as he stood beside me, silently asking if I was okay. My mother's tone took on a wheedling edge. "We'd like to meet you. And your husband. This is a special time." My heart pounded as anger, disbelief, and a dull pang of longing collided. Part of me wanted to yell, "Where were you all these years?" Instead, I forced my voice to remain steady. "I don't know if that's a good idea." She hesitated, sensing my resistance. "People make mistakes," she murmured, "and we just want to be part of your life again." I hung up shortly after, my throat tight with unspoken words. Brian enveloped me in a hug, and I let out a shaky breath. Their sudden interest felt like a cruel twist. For so long, my parents had acted as if I didn't exist. Now, because I carried a child, they were desperate to reclaim what they'd thrown away. The years of silence couldn't be undone with a single phone call. I agreed to meet my mother a week later, more out of curiosity than hope. She chose a chic cafe in a part of town I rarely visited, telling in itself because she never ventured beyond her comfort zone without reason. When I walked in, I spotted her immediately. She was dressed elegantly, though not as immaculately as I remembered. She rose, a tentative smile on her face, and I realized she looked older. Her eyes searched my stomach before they flicked to my face. "You look..." "Well," she said, the words halting. "Pregnancy suits you." I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Why now?" I asked. "Why did you and Dad decide you want back in my life?" She stiffened, folding her hands in her lap. "We've had time to think," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "We were wrong to judge Brian so harshly. Your father regrets it. We both do." I let out a short laugh, bitterness curdling in my throat. "Regret? You didn't just judge, you exiled me. And now, magically, when I'm pregnant, you're remorseful? That's convenient." She flinched at my harsh tone, her composure faltering. "We only want to help. Parenthood is challenging. We can offer financial support, emotional support, whatever you need." My stomach twisted at the mention of money. I recalled how they once offered no support at all. I shoved down the tears threatening to rise. I don't need your money or your pity. I needed my parents on my wedding day, when I was moving out, when I was scared and broke. You weren't there. She reached into her purse and slid an envelope across the table, ignoring my words. Take it, she insisted, as if that alone would compensate for the years of abandonment. I pushed the envelope back. No, I said flatly. We've gotten this far without you. We'll continue to do so. My mother looked wounded, but the frustration in her eyes hinted that she wasn't used to hearing no. We made mistakes, she began again, her tone trembling. Your father can't admit it out loud yet, but he feels terrible. We want to be involved in our grandchild's life. I could feel my pulse pounding. A swirl of memories, countless lonely nights, job rejections, painful scrapes with rent, rushed back to me. In all those times, I would have given anything for a caring word from my parents. Instead, their silence had been deafening. I'm sorry, I managed, though my voice shook with contained fury. I can't just snap my fingers and pretend none of that happened. We stared at each other across the table. She looked as though she wanted to argue, but my hardened expression must have stopped her. In the end, she gathered the envelope and her purse, rising from the chair. When you're ready, she said quietly, we'll be waiting. Then she walked out, shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. I sat there for a moment, battling the tumult inside me. As a child, I'd looked up to this woman, believed she could do no wrong. Now, I saw her as someone deeply flawed, someone who let her pride override love. When I finally left the cafe, I felt a mix of anger, relief, and sadness. Brian was waiting at home, worry etched on his face. I told him everything, sparing no detail. He listened without interruption, then placed a gentle hand on my stomach. You have me, he said. You'll always have me. That's the only promise that matters. I clung to his words, determined to protect our future from the grasping hands of a past that had done nothing but wound me. In my 7th month, my parents escalated their attempts to reconcile, but the method they chose only cemented my distrust. They showed up unannounced at my workplace, a bustling cafe where my coworkers knew bits and pieces of my history. I spotted them through the window before they entered, my father in a tailored suit, my mother in a crisp dress, both of them surveying the humble surroundings with thinly veiled discomfort. My heart pounded, the baby's kicks echoing my tension. Rather than letting them stroll in to cause a scene, I stepped outside to meet them. You can't just appear wherever I am, I said, arms folded protectively over my belly. My father cleared his throat, the awkwardness palpable. We just want to talk. Time is running short before the baby arrives, and we'd like to be part of her life. Rage flared at the word her. Somehow, they knew my child's gender without me telling them. Who told you it's a girl? I demanded. My mother's eyes flicked to my father, but he simply shrugged. We asked around, he admitted. Look, she broke in. There's going to be a baby shower soon, isn't there? We'd love to attend. My stomach churned with anger and a trace of hurt. I remembered how they refused even to show up for my wedding. Now they expected an invitation to celebrate the impending birth of a grandchild they'd never supported? I shook my head. You're not on the guest list. Their faces fell, but I steeled myself. You made it clear long ago that I wasn't your daughter. You don't get to pick and choose convenient moments to play family. I turned and walked back inside, ignoring their pleas that followed me. My boss shot me a sympathetic look, but I returned to work, refusing to let them disrupt my day any further. The baby shower was a lively event filled with pink decorations, silly games, and the warmth of true friends. Brian's parents arrived, brimming with excitement despite the distance they'd traveled. My coworkers offered baby clothes and essentials, each item a testament to how community could form without the bonds of blood. As I opened gifts, I felt grateful that my child would enter a world where love was earned through genuine care, not demanded by those who abandoned us. There was a bittersweet undercurrent, though, a silent reminder that the two people who once meant everything to me were missing. When the shower ended and the last of the confetti was swept away, I found multiple missed calls from my parents. Against my better judgment, I listened to one voicemail. My father, his voice trembling with outrage, insisted that they deserved a place in my life, that I was robbing them of their rights as grandparents. I felt a surge of anger so fierce that my hands shook. Rights. Had they thought about my rights when they banished me for following my heart? My mother left a subsequent message, her tone pleading rather than demanding. She insisted she wanted to be there for me during the final weeks of pregnancy. I deleted both voicemails, my resolve firm. If they truly cared, they would have shown that care years ago. Brian tried to console me as I stomped around the living room, tears of frustration brimming in my eyes. But in truth, I didn't need comforting. I needed them gone. With each step closer to my due date, I found myself increasingly protective of my marriage, my child, and my own mental well-being. My parents had no place here. They had forfeited their role the moment they chose pride over love. Labor arrived in the early hours of a chilly morning, a startling rush of pain that jolted me awake. Brian fumbled with car keys, half asleep but wholly dedicated to getting me to the hospital. Hours of contractions blurred together until our daughter, tiny, wrinkled, and astonishingly perfect, came squalling into the world. In that moment, nothing else mattered. I cradled her in my arms, tears dripping down my cheeks, heart overflowing with a love so fierce it took my breath away. Brian was by my side, his face filled with awe. Everything we had struggled for, every sleepless night, every tear shed over my parents' betrayal, felt worth it. This was our family, forged in sweat and pain and devotion. But even in that moment of bliss, the shadows returned. A nurse gently informed me that my parents were outside, asking to be let in. My entire body tensed. I could see them through the small glass window, my mother pressing her hand to the glass, my father clutching a bouquet of roses. Their eyes searched the room, desperate for a glimpse of the baby. The nurse asked if I wanted to allow them in. I stared down at my sleeping daughter, her soft breathing a reminder of everything precious I now had to protect. Memories of my parents' disdain flooded me, those phone calls they refused to return, that front row seat at my wedding they left glaringly empty. They had made me feel worthless, unworthy of their presence or love. Now, because I had created a new life, they believed they could walk back into mine. I looked at the nurse, voice unwavering. "No visitors," I said, "only the people on my approved list." The nurse nodded, stepping outside to relay my decision. Through the window, I watched my mother's tears and my father's furious protest, but I felt no pity. They had disowned me, and I had survived without them. This was the consequence of their cruelty. Clutching my baby close, I welcomed the wave of quiet triumph that washed over me. There would be no forgiveness. They had chosen to sever our bond, and I refused to stitch it back together just to soothe their regret. In my daughter's peaceful face, I saw a future untainted by their betrayal. A life defined by love freely given, not forced. I kissed her tiny forehead, my heart steel in its resolution. My parents had lost their chance. This time, they would stay gone,